Welcome to episode number 271 of The Vinyl Guide. This is Nate, your humble host, and today we're going to be talking with a really interesting guy, Mr. Clint Walsh from the band Dot Hacker, and so much more. Clint has dedicated his life to music, touring and collaborating with a ton of bands, like Gnarls Barkley, The Motels, Juliette Lewis and the Licks, Chris Verena and Tweaker, and a ton more. And today, we're going to dig deep into the history of the band Dot Hacker, a group Clint founded alongside Eric Gardner, Jonathan Hitchke, and Josh Klinghoffer. Now, it's been a while since we heard from Dot Hacker. Their last LP was number 3, released in 2017. But just recently, the band released a brand new surprise single, Divination, as well as a vinyl tricolor splatter reissue of their first album, Inhibition. Both are available at Org Music, so head over to orgmusic.com and grab yourself copies before they're gone. Now today, Clint and I cover a whole lot of ground: the founding of Dot Hacker, his music career up to that point, the creation of each Dot Hacker album, including the How's Your Process 1-2 punch, the issues of being in a band like Dot Hacker, where all the musicians are touring and parts of other bands, the coming together and perhaps renaissance of Dot Hacker, and lots more. Now, what you're hearing today, right now, is only a portion of the interview. There is a much extended version available only to the patreon.com/vinyl guide community. So head over there now to hear the rest of the interview, and you also get to see it. That's right, we've got a video version of this interview. And man, oh man, is Clint handsome. You gotta see this guy. The only downside is you have to look at me too, but I'm sure your gag reflexes will all deal with that. The video interview is only available to our patreon.com/vinyl guide community. So if you like this interview, you like our podcast, and you want to hear and see more, head over to patreon.com/vinyl guide. Help support the Vinyl Guide podcast and enjoy the rest of the show. And also just 2 quick bits of business. Today we are brought to you by the very best record cleaner in the history of molecules, the Groove Washer. Clean your records with the very best of the best record cleaners, the one I use every day, and it is super affordable. Ask your local record dealer for the Groove Washer by name and accept no substitutes. Or you could order direct from groovewasher.com and use promo code VinylGuide10 for a discount. That's the Groove Washer at groovewasher.com, discount code VinylGuide10 at checkout. And also, peoples, we are brought to you today by AudiofileUSA.com, the online record shop that only sells excellent and near-mint vinyl records. AudiofileUSA.com has over 40,000 titles in stock, and you never have to guess on the condition. They are always in amazing shape, many with shrink wrap, original hype stickers, or even still sealed after decades of storage. Head over to AudiofileUSA.com, dig deep into the website, search around, and find the deals. That's AudiofileUSA.com, home of the Holy Grails. All right, we got our business done and we are ready to rock. Let's get into today's conversation with Mr. Clint Walsh of Dot Hacker. Clint.
Hey, how are you?
Look at you.
How you doing?
Good. Oh, hang on a sec. Let me look at your gear here. I'll have plenty of time for you. I'm looking at the gear really quick here. Is that a real Prophet 5?
No, it's a Prophet 6. It's one of the the new Dave Smiths, whatever's a few years ago.
All right. Well, look, we've got 2020 in our rear view mirror now, and looks like things are starting to look up. And I tell you one sign. Well, there's been many signs of hope, but one of them is that there's a new Dot Hacker song out.
Oh, man.
And it sounds like it's, I'm going to say, a start, perhaps, to a next phase of the project. Would that be fair?
Yeah, sure. Sure.
You sound like you don't know either.
Yeah, it's the whole thing was done under a very different dynamic than kind of what any of us were used to. Mm-hmm. And then you add in, doing it remotely, not being in the same room together, trying to create some sort of language or vocabulary that was able to be, translated other than musically in front of each other.
Okay, so divination was recorded separately. You guys weren't together in any way for that, no?
No, Josh had recorded a piano and a vocal and then sent it to me. And, I'm kind of skipping over a lot of the details, but essentially Josh sent it to me. I kind of put it into a world.
Mm-hmm.
And then Eric and Jonathan, I kind of put that then through communication with them, got them into that world, and it kind of all glued together a lot longer than I thought.
It's a bit like the Beatles' Free as a Bird.
A bit like that, yeah. Which seems to be like the new norm nowadays. Like, hey, if you got a vocal, you're done.
Let's go back a bit. Tell me about your background. Are you from a musical family?
No, not really. But I grew up in a town in Connecticut that had a really good. I took piano lessons as a kid and took to it, and then the town that I grew up in had a really good public music program for public schools, and I really benefited from that and played trumpet. Did well at that, and then had the saddest thing of all to give it up because I had a mouthful of braces and starting in 8th grade. So then the guitar was next, and I dropped out of school and dropped out of college, moved to New York, lived there for a lot of the 90s.
How did that go down with the parents?
Not too well. Yeah, I mean, even still to this day, they just kind of say to me, like, music, it's like really as Marge Simpson as you can get. Like, music is none of my business. They just kind of have this, I don't know what it is that you do or how you do it. But
so they didn't have records around the house. Did you, were they even listeners?
My mother, no, at all. My father was very into Harry Chapin, Neil Diamond, Don McLean. That was the music in the house, but my brother and sister, my older brother and sister, were the ones who really, this is like 1980, 82, the dawn of MTV and New Wave, and they just were the coolest people and brought home, all of the early alternative stuff, and that just started me off. And so my very early memories were like listening to Beach Boys and the Star Wars soundtrack and stuff like that. But it quickly turned to REM and Cure and all that U2. MTV really took a hold of me.
Were there any records that your parents forbid you from bringing in the house?
The only one was I bought Eddie Murphy's Comedian record. I just thought that was awesome. My dad said, "You can't listen to this, that's bad language," and I found the tape in his car 2 weeks later. So did you talk to him about it? Did you say, "Hey, we could listen to this together now"? Or was that not an option in the relationship? Yeah, to revisit things isn't a good idea. So and then went to school in DC for a couple of years, got to see Fugazi play at a free show near Union Station. And that was awesome. But then, moved to New York thinking that I was going to do something. Mm-hmm. But once I visited friends in the East Village in the summer of 91 and was just like, this is incredible. What am I doing? So moved there, worked, played in bands, started bands. Then I started playing in a house band for a place called Squeezebox, which was this awesome club on Fridays. And I had drag queens for singers, and you just learned all these awesome rock songs and these fabulous performers. And that was kind of the beginning of learning how to play specific songs and specifically, and got drafted into going on the road with a band called Psychotica. And my first tour, my first time going anywhere, and got here in the middle of that tour. By then, I was dating somebody in that entourage, and then basically on that tour, and then ended up following her to LA after the tour, and then that was it for me. Mm-hmm. I've been here for 21 years, and summer 99, beginning of 99.
Well, I mean, in LA, that's kind of the ground zero for touring and recording and whatnot. How were you able to navigate that environment? I mean, it's a brand new town for you. Did gigs come pretty quick, or was it tough work?
It was bizarre. It was a good choice over New York because New York wasn't, I guess, the scene I was always hoping for, and seemed like there were a lot of small circles. It was hard to meet people, for me at least. Mm-hmm. And even though I would go to Coney Island High and play I could play CBGBs a bunch. That was cool. LA was the kind of the place that made sense. And really, like, the relationship I had didn't last long when I got here. And I by the time I realized that I didn't know anybody, I was sleeping on a couch. I had met through the girl I moved out here with or for. I met a guy who was in Nine Inch Nails in the beginning, and he was starting to do a lot of production work and stuff. And then we became fast friends. I started working with him. His name's Chris Brenna. Mm-hmm. And then this was like in the day of the remix. Remember when doing a remix was like a big thing?
It was its own album.
Yeah. So started to work more and more with him doing stuff like that. Then, LA seems to be more of an open circle. It seems like everybody knows everybody here, and it's just like one giant circle.
So you go from that scene, from staying on the couch to eventually touring with Gnarls Barkley. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. What else was in between? What have I skimmed over?
No, not too much. Doing a lot of work with Chris. We did a remix for U2 that I still hear at sporting events that my guitars are on, which is crazy. We did a lot of remixes for a lot of different people. We did a lot of video game scoring soundtracks and themes. Yeah, it was great. That was the time when I really kind of became a working musician. I was able to not have a proper real day job. And then 2000 started doing more touring with the Dwarves, and that was also bringing in some income. And then Chris had a manager who also managed Brian Burton, and it was early 2006, and they said they're looking for a drummer and a guitar player for whatever reasons, and that's how I got in. Chris asked me to go with him, mm-hmm. And then that was my first ooh, I'm getting a salary. This is I have to pay taxes on this gig. You know what I mean? It's a real gig with, you pay unemployment insurance and the gig and the whole thing. It was official, negotiate salary and all that stuff. But it was great. And then, I think I met Josh that first day or the first week or something, because he was originally going to be the guitar player. And then something happened. He was playing with Sparks, I think. So he wasn't available. So I was in, but then Chris and I couldn't do a couple of shows that they already had booked because we were playing E3 because we had just done a video game theme. So Josh was my substitute for that. So I met him early on, and we kind of became fast friends and stayed in touch. But in the beginning, that gig was crazy. It was pretty crazy. It was fun dressing up as a stormtrooper. It was funny. It was bizarre.
Now, this is also at the height of that song Crazy. Is that right?
Yeah.
And I imagine touring at that point was very different than any other tour you'd been on. I mean, you're in relative comfort. You're sleeping indoors. You've got predictable meals. That's a pretty good gig, I would imagine.
It was fantastic. Yeah, it was great. Mm-hmm. Also, before other things, before time passed, for a minute, it was a really cool, fun thing to be involved in. And, I'm sure my kind of excitement about it was hard to hide. I just felt every day we were so lucky to, get to do this, because I was used to a band and, roommates in hotels and all that crap. And, mm-hmm. that was not bad.
Now, you weren't the only guy from Dot Hacker on that tour, is that right? That's where you met some of the other ones, Jonathan.
Through that tour, Josh ends up replacing the keyboard player for whatever reason. So, that was basically the beginning of the end for us. We just became thick as thieves, and it was probably at the end of 2006. That we turned to each other and started mumbling about starting a band. And then I said something maybe we should just be friends. Maybe it's just a better idea to be friends. And he said, no, that's why we have to do it. So that was pretty much the impetus. And then we tried out people. We were looking for the right people. And after a while, I just said, hey, I know this guy Eric who I play in the motels with, and he's pretty much the best drummer I know and a great guy. And he fit in seamlessly. And then once Josh and Eric met, and then Josh knew Jonathan from up north or from around, I think, Nevada City, California. And he came down, and, after about a year of looking for different people or whatever, it finally solidified as that, I think, around 2008.
So you went from, I guess, being part of bands, but also being more of a side man, to this collective that I would imagine is a bit more of a democracy than a dictatorship.
Yeah.
How was that transition for you? Is that something you wanted?
Yeah, I think there was a very kind of there was an idea that, like, well, we're all sidemen. Maybe we can, like, be in the band that we want to be in, the kind of thing that we always wanted to be in. Mm-hmm. I think that was kind of the impetus. And, we were excited. We got a rehearsal space pretty quick. No, well, not pretty quick, but we finally got a small space, the four of us. Jonathan was either about to move down, had been staying here for a while or whatever, but he finally moved down. And, during this time, Gnarls Barkley's getting ready to, like, go back out on tour for their second record. And Chris wasn't going to rejoin the band. So, because I think he was working with Marilyn Manson or something. Mm-hmm. So, it depends on who you ask. But I remember being in the room and finding out that Chris wasn't going to be there. And I said to Josh, we should get Eric in. And then Josh at the time was pretty close with somebody in their inner circle and called and said, we have the guy for you. And that was pretty much it. Once they heard Eric play, I was like, yeah, no problem. So point being, as soon as we're starting to come together, three of us take off to go tour with Gnarls Barkley.
Yeah.
So depends on who you ask that question to, because I'm sure John was like, I just moved down here and these guys they leave. So,
I mean, it sounds like a great idea in theory. We're all very proficient musicians. We get along really well. This is a lot of fun. We're all very creative, but all of your day gigs depend on other people and touring. And as soon as you start something and start to get a little bit of momentum, someone's got this, I will say, financial pressure to go out on the road and abandon the rest of the band. Was that a difficult thing to work through?
Absolutely. I mean, I was the next one to do it because I was arguably the busiest, I guess, I had ever been at that point, at least playing live shows. And I ended up in early 2009 getting a gig to go on tour with Johnny Hallyday. I don't know if you know who he is, but he's the French Elvis. Only plays soccer stadiums, but only in France. And, it was more money than I had ever been offered. And it was a bizarro thing. And I got to spend, an awesome 6 months or a year in France. And it was a gig I had to take. But, telling these guys, it was not easy. I'm good at doing this to myself, but I was racked with guilt over that for, years. But as soon as we started recording our first record, I was like, I got to take this gig because I have to pay my bills. Mm-hmm. So that definitely put a thorn in the band side. And then when I got back from my first tour, I was gone for 3 months, came back. Josh had told me that the Chili Peppers asked him to join. So that was kind of like, I see you're having to leave for a few months. I'm now going to leave for a decade.
At that point, was there the understanding like, yeah, hey, I'll be able to do both? Because the Chili Peppers are a band that I think they make an album every 5 years. They go to sleep for a while, then they become active, and so I could see where there would be an understanding early on that I could probably balance both. Was that part of the conversation?
Absolutely, and I think everybody, again, depends on who you ask, but I really wanted to believe that was possible. And you look at the proof, like we made some records, but it definitely, in my opinion, changed the dynamic of the band kind of, on a level that I think is we're still kind of working out. Like it was, it's just kind of funny. It was something that I feel like we all kind of were expecting it to happen because he had been hanging around with them for years, and we'd heard little things here and there about a possibility of him kind of being more a part of their deal, because he had like played shows with them, went on tour with them right around that time, like in between Gnarls Barkley shows and stuff. So yeah, there was really we were really idealistic, thinking that we could do this. But and the older we got and the more kind of like the charm faded out of it, we all realized, we're adults and we need to make money. And that kind of chips away at, how much you can invest in your soul in like keeping a practice space and trying to do it. So it ended up kind of causing us to, we all had to go find our own Chili Peppers.
Right. So the first album, Inhibition, and the EP to some degree, that was recorded in 2009, but you held it for 3 years.
Yeah.
What was the reason? What was the discussion around holding off on releasing that?
I really can't specifically remember. I'm pretty sure it wasn't. I know that like the mixing was done. I wasn't there. That was a whole issue. And I know that, maybe it was it was like largely finished, but needed to be. You know what? I can't actually give you an answer. It may have had something to do with like we didn't have a label. Maybe we were discouraged to put it out because the Chili Peppers had a record. I really can't tell you. I know that it was mixed and everything was finished. Geez, I should ask them.
Because I would imagine you've got this band. All of a sudden, your guitarist gets this amazing gig. I think record companies would have been lining up to see what else he had available.
Yeah, I don't. I'd love to say any number of things, but I can't tell you honestly because I can't remember.
Okay, so fast forward to 2012 when it was released. Were you able to tour at all? Did Dot Hacker do many shows?
Yeah, we played shows around town. We did small tours. I mean, you could say over the next maybe 2 or 3 years, we toured with Cedric Bixler Zavala's band, Zavala's. We opened some shows for them up the coast. We opened for Blonde Redhead on a small tour. We got, because Josh knows everybody, we got cool gigs. Like we opened up for Jane's Addiction when Eric Avery was back in the band. We were so stoked about that. There were cool little things like that. We got to go to Japan a couple times. That was awesome. But never like really economically sustainable or even really offered because there was never that much time that anybody could really kind of, donate to it, I guess you could say.
Right. And everyone still had all their own gigs, things that they were doing on the side.
Right.
And in 2014, Dot Hacker did a couple of albums, How's Your Process Work and Play.
Yes.
Were those recorded on the heels of the Inhibition release?
Yes, I think so. I think it was kind of like in between the first Chili Peppers record and the second one. And Josh had a bunch of time. And that's when we started to play a bunch and get those songs in order. But by this time, for, several reasons, the songwriting structure, how that happened, the songs were largely Josh's.
Okay.
And, and that was a definite. The first record, a lot of it we wrote together, like Eye Opener was something I brought in, and then the band, we all kind of finished it together. Josh, I had the melody, but obviously Josh wrote all the words. There were a lot of songs on that record that seemed to be more of the four of us of those in those moments. The How's Your Process stuff, again, this is just my impression and my foggy memory, but we got these songs together and then we just tried to really work on them, but they never really got finished until we were in the studio. Certain things like just vocal parts or other kind of melodies were discovered in the studio working on them. And yeah, that was an interesting time.
It sounds like you guys had difficulty editing it down.
Yeah.
Thus the two albums. I mean, look, they're about 30 minutes each. You could have made one album. What was the discussion about splitting them up into two releases?
Yeah, again, depending on who you ask, in my opinion, I'll say at the time, I've never liked the idea of a long record. I kind of had this snobby old person's attitude of, 45 minutes. If you're making a double album, make a double album. But if you're making a record, it should be no longer than the side of a cassette. Mm. And it's a very snobby opinion, but one I kind of hold firm to. And I think what really did it in was we couldn't agree on a sequence. And in order to kind of save these songs in order to appease everybody, I think it was Jonathan came up with the idea of making two separate records because we couldn't all agree on a sequence or songs to drop or to leave off. So, this is kind of the beginning of like the unraveling sort of, what kind of led to us not really doing much over the last few years. It was just like, there was a lot of unforeseen things that started to creep up, including like just being able to agree on an album sequence. We'd already done the hard work.
Right. Look, I share your feelings about long albums. Because it doesn't give all the songs justice. It's in asking someone to listen to something beyond 45 minutes is really asking for a lot of patience that most people, even today, don't have.
The Wall is like one of my favorite records, but that's a long listen. I wouldn't ask anybody to do that.
Honestly, yeah, I've got an opinion on that. I think it'd be tough to cull that down into a proper single album, but that's another discussion. But then doing the kind of the use your illusion kind of approach is, I think, sound. It kept everyone happy. But then we start to wade into the area where we touched on earlier, which is it sounds like it's a functioning democracy, complete with all of its issues. Dot Hacker became this project that you wanted to all be equals and all have a say. And then now you're having difficulty agreeing on what that statement should be and what it should look like.
Speaking for myself, I was really kind of at the beginning of a long road downward, and I wasn't bringing myself to it as much. And with that, I think I was just kind of giving my power away. And in that, I think that kind of mushroomed the dynamic on my part. And then it kind of became not a democracy, probably because speaking for myself, I didn't want it to be anymore, I guess, because I wasn't really having a lot of fun at that time. So
you weren't phoning it in.
It was just very daunting, being in a band with somebody who, you both play the same instruments, you both can, but you never really had a dialogue about who's going to do what, or, just kind of leaving it open. And for the first record, it really seemed to kind of work without explanation. And then suddenly it became very interesting to me to like want explanation. And that didn't really help the group out. The other guys all have their own take on it and their own, issues with that. But I think people's own issues with it not being a democracy anymore, I think just speaks to who they were at that time. Josh is probably under a bunch of pressure because he's in the Chili Peppers now. And
sure. Well, he's quite prolific, and I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, but he's got, as being part of the Chili Peppers, he's required, it's his duty to bring his A material to them. Did you feel that there was a compromise when it came to Dot Hacker material around that time?
Well, if anybody was bringing in material besides him, I would have a better answer for you, but nobody really was. Like, I think I brought in maybe a song called Whatever You Want, which is on one of the two of them. I don't even know. But
talk about a passive aggressive title.
I know, really. And I think that was like the only actual words I brought in too. I mean, really, that was like where I was at. Like, whatever you want, here you go. So, I mean, yeah, nobody else was really bringing in as much stuff, or was like by this time, Josh owned a couple of houses. We were practicing at one of them. Like it had become very much like
it became the Josh show. It sounds like,
yeah,
and there may have been some resentment.
I would say we all love each other too much to have resentment kind of set in. Speaking for myself, it just felt like, and I've said this to people close to me, it just made me feel like every decision Josh was making was like the best one, and every decision I was making was the worst one. And like you could say musically or philosophically or creatively or whatever it is, I just wasn't feeling confident in my own abilities. And there wasn't really a foil at the time to kind of combat Josh. And it just kind of, not to say that he needed combating, but there wasn't as much, I suppose, like creative tension as there, in a good way, as there was in that first record.
Right. Okay. Sense. Because it sounds like part of your superpower is to be able to maintain your post and to be able to be alongside someone who quite often can be shining brighter than the rest of the members of the band. You did it with Juliette Lewis. You're doing it now with the Motels. You've done it with Gnarls Barkley. But this thing that you created is now you're going back to that role.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, but I mean, it was, I didn't know who Josh was when I met him. Mm-hmm. That he had played with PJ Harvey. It was just a quick sidebar. Chris Vrenna was working with a guy named Paul Leary, who was a guitar player in Bottle Surfers. Mm-hmm. And he worked with us on a bunch of remixes. And one time in like 2000 or 2001, he says, "Hey, do you want to come out? Buttles are getting back together and going out on tour. Do you want to be the second guitar player? Do you want to come out with us?" I said, "Hell yeah, that sounds awesome." Long story short, never heard about it again. Turns out John Frusciante had recommended to them, "You should take my friend Josh." Mm-hmm. Josh got that gig. So funny that, like, what a small, weird world. I didn't find that out until we were, having drinks in 2006. Yeah. But so my point is, while I didn't know who he was when we became friends and all that stuff, as I got to know him and meeting or hearing about people that he knows or associates with, it became, very obvious that, like, he's going to get more attention in the band just right off the bat. And I could give a rat's ass. Like, I don't mm-hmm. care. Like, as you said, I'm used to it. I don't really care. It's my job. If he's my friend and he's getting attention, all the more great for him. Like, mm-hmm. I'm happy that I'm lucky to be his friend, and, we're in each other's lives. I think like the Chili Peppers kind of blew that up. And maybe it helped blow that up in my mind. Like, yeah, okay, now there's people in Japan who know all about him, and South America and Europe, and
you see him on TV. Oh, they're playing on Mount Fuji, and it must be quite surreal. So how did it then transition into Dot Hacker number 3? Was that a painful experience?
Yes, for me it was. Yes. That was very much a rushed record that I think Josh was trying to make. He was trying to make a record with us at the same time that he was making the second record that he made with them. And by this time, I was a little bit more advanced, or whatever the opposite of that, regressed from wherever I was at the time. Mm-hmm. And there were other frustrations, and I don't want to speak for anybody, but, I'm sure that Josh was wanting to get, this is me saying this on my own, just from what I've experienced. Mm-hmm. It seemed to me that Josh was wanting to have more of a voice in the Chili Peppers creatively, or at least wanting to be heard as much. And that frustration probably came back into the studio on us, where we weren't really doing much of a good job of, kind of nurturing that and saying it's okay. We were all up our own asses. And while Josh is trying to do a nice thing, he's probably putting too much pressure on himself. And while we're trying to, like, be a band, we're kind of the three of us are having our own issues. So it just kind of spiraled,
Mm.
in my opinion.
Sounds like you guys need to hire that guy with the sweater that came out in the Metallica sessions. Yeah. So was it a bit of a shot in the dark? Was it a surprise that Josh is, he made this demo for Divination, and you guys are talking about, what the next phase of the band looks like?
Well, yeah, that was an interesting, it just couldn't have come along more organically. And on the heels of a horrible accident from a good friend of ours was involved in. After that third record, we nobody said anything to anybody about Dot Hacker for a long time. And my relationships with, the guys in the band at times became strained. Josh and I definitely drifted apart in a sense for a while. And I needed to do a lot of healing and changing and growing on my own. Putting that record out was a big deal to me. That was a big boulder up a hill that I've been pushing for a long time. Mm-hmm. And in the beginning of last year, right around this record coming out of mine and Clint Mansell's, our friend is involved in a horrible accident and he's in a coma. And his recovery is slow at first, but he's finally out of it. And as a kind of gesture to our friend, Josh writes a song and says, let's get this kind of immediate friend group around us to all contribute to it. And our friend is a bass player, and let's work on the song. When he's better, he'll be playing on this song. It'll be for him, or at the very least, just a sign of support and love that we have for our friend and his wife and our friends. And by this time, Josh had heard that Berlin record and could not have been more supportive and loving to my efforts. And that meant a lot to me. It was very much an olive branch, so to speak. And it really, his kind of extolling praise and support was great. And so anyways, he writes this song and he says, everybody's going to contribute. And, Clint, why don't you just kind of, he's kind of threw me under the bus. And Clint, why don't you go ahead and put it together? So again, it was like this kind of piano demo that I think he sent to Eric, and Eric, recorded like a one drum microphone thing. And I think there was this understanding that I was just going to put it together and I would produce it and kind of select who comes in where. And we're talking like 10 or 12 people. They're all going to record whatever it is they can. It ended up coming out really, really good. It was surprisingly enjoyable. We had an incredible moment where we played it for our friend who's now doing better than he has in a long time. And it was incredibly emotional for all involved. And then out of that experience, Josh had said to everybody, or to, I guess, maybe Jonathan or Eric first, like, what do you think about doing a Dot Hacker song, but doing it the same kind of way with me producing, as it were, which is a term that is a very subjectively defined. It seems kind of like it means different things to different people at times, I think. But we got.
Do you feel the weight of that word? Do you feel like when you hear of the suggestion for you producing it, is that a blessing or a curse?
Well, the last thing I wanted to do was get involved with Dot Hacker because I just wasn't. Mm-hmm. I just needed time away from it and was happy I did that. And so then by the time this whole thing kind of came around, it was like I just said, okay, well, I would like to do it, but it would need to be with me as the producer, with me kind of having, there was this idea in the band that, one or others had mentioned, like, you guys need a producer. We need a producer. We need somebody to say no to people. We need to kind of like, there was 1,000 reasons why that may be a good idea. And, I was as surprised as anybody to have it be me. But I think at this point in my life, I've shown that I'm capable of it, and these guys are my closest friends, and I would have no interest other than to make them shine like the like the stars they are.
They trust your decisions. I mean, the way I read it is, if Clint produces it, it's like, okay, well, then it's in good hands.
I think, I think that was
you're the steward.
Yeah, I think that was the kind of the feeling. So, Josh sent me we had a Zoom meeting. We said, okay, let's do it. But under this kind of guideline of I'm the producer and I have the final say and I'm going to create the vibe of the song. We all love the same things. And I kind of made a reaffirmation to them of, what I'd said back then. Like I was really interested in being in a band that sounded like, New Order and like Two Boy Army and some stuff like that. I was really into that. I bought a Selena because I could not get enough of that sound. And so I said to that, Peter Gabriel, like, I just loved all that stuff. I want that. That's what I wanted to do back then. I would like to do that now. And I think that, they kind of got on board. And so I took a piano demo with vocal in it. And that was all it was. And then kind of made a blueprint with a loose kind of idea, like, oh, here's a kick drum feel in the chorus here. That was probably pretty much, other than like some muting of instruments at times, probably the only sort of instruction I gave to these guys. And through dialogue and learning how to do that over like this, which is not easy, no matter who you are or how many times you played music with people, it was still a process of its own. And I thought it came out really good. I was surprised and excited and really, like, it was really a genuine surprise. Like, the last thing I would have thought was how it was going to be like this. But I guess it kind of started with, like, this is what I need to be like for myself in order to be a part of this project now. And, the guys were gracious enough to allow me that. What kind of future it has, I guess, depends on the dynamic, how we were doing. Jonathan's in Nebraska, people are just out of town. How are we going to do this? Are we ever going to play music in a room together again? Do any of us necessarily want to? There's a whole bunch of questions you could ask because it's been so long. And I think, speaking for myself, I'm a much different person than I was when that third record was released or made or whatever, so that's it.
Well, look, if Mr. Bungle can do it, so
I agree. Yeah, I think it's just interesting, that kind of healing that Josh and I have experienced in our friendship has definitely kind of aided in our musical communication. And, I'm not interested in that going away anytime soon. So it's exciting, but daunting.
Well, yeah. And it's good you're not forcing it, but Clint, I got to tell you, you are living a dream that so many people aspire to do. And the chances you've taken and the bold decisions you've made have really been to your credit. And you make music, you make music, and I'm not only talking about Dot Hacker, but the other music that you make is just to be able to do that is such a privilege. But for us to be able to listen to it, it's our privilege as well. And the band Dot Hacker, I thoroughly enjoy. I love the band. I get lost in the music. I get a lot of music. I get half a dozen albums sent to me a day or whatever. And Dot Hacker is a band where I put it on half a dozen times or more. It's something that's kind of in the rotation of me and my family. And especially that first album, Inhibition, which I'm assuming to you is probably if you were to point at any Dot Hacker point in time, that's the one that you would point to, right?
No question. Yeah. No question.
Yeah. I reckon there's still petrol in the tank there, but I'll let you guys work out the details.
Hey, everything you just said, it means so much, and I appreciate you, taking the time to talk to me and to even say that stuff means a lot, So thank you.
Yeah, most of it's true. No. Okay. So let me ask you this: do you have a record collection?
A vinyl collection?
Yeah. Are you the vinyl, or are you kind of like, take it or leave it, whatever? I
was alive, I was a kid riding my bike to the record store to get vinyl, but I definitely stopped when CDs came out like an idiot. So my record collection is maybe this. And it's like everything from like Pac-Man Fever 45, like the You Look Marvelous 45 from Billy Crystal to all sorts of shit. But, it's definitely like, a dated, I think it stops probably around the Joshua Tree was one of my last like vinyl purchases.
Yeah, look, we were all there. We were all we were all wooed by the sound and the promise of the CD. I'm no different. I've got just a slightly more pronounced obsessive compulsive disorder gene, which means that Yep. So this Divination coming out on vinyl. Mm-hmm. What was the discussion around that? It's like you created this song. It's like, okay, we need to put it out somehow. Let's do a single. What was that conversation?
Well, I think we definitely wanted it to come out on vinyl. I was really interested in having. I mean, I made the suggestion, but Eric's the one who did it. Eric's been really putting out a lot of great artwork over the last couple of years, and I was hoping that we could get something out on vinyl that was some sort of like physical representation of his work. Mm-hmm. And then there's the Inhibition anniversary release, and we wanted to kind of call attention to that. So we thought about a new song, and then maybe we could get a second song together before that time frame, that window closed, but that didn't happen. So I think Josh suggested, why don't we put on the other side when we put the pre-production version of Divination, and that has basically the version that I was given, at the start of all of this stuff.
So I'm going to go out on a limb here because the cover of Divination is by Eric.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's a wonderful image. I have no idea what it means, but it's a striking image. In the projects prior to Divination, it's been Josh who's managed the artwork.
Well, yes. Eric, I believe, found the photo for... No, Eric found the artist who the snail nipple shots. Mm-hmm. Eric found him. We all love that. It's always kind of been between Josh and Eric. I think Josh did the third one. I think Josh found the artist for the first one. But again, I would say that was definitely like, I love bands that are like associated with visuals. I love all that shit so much. Mm-hmm. And I think, but I'm very I'm not good at any of that stuff. And it always kind of seemed like that discussion, while I think everybody wanted to be involved in it, it was ultimately going to be up to Josh and Eric. And then, whatever that discussion becomes, it became, I think for one of them, Josh had the idea for the, how's your process? The one with the nipple, we couldn't show that one in some markets. So he said, did you remember the Jane's Addiction Ritual cover?
It's even, so just for people who are listening may not know what we're talking about. There's two albums, How's Your Process, Work and Play. One of them they both feature a snail, but one of them, I think Play, features the snail on a nipple.
Yes.
And it's interesting, on Discogs, they don't show that one. Is even Discogs, which, is, I thought anything goes on it. But yeah, so I think people are very cautious about showing nipple in 2021. Amazing. What a planet.
But what a great, I have to give it up to Josh again. That was such a great pivot. Like, why don't we just do that? I mean, we were all such huge fans of that band back then. So it was like, yes, that is the perfect chef's.
All right, Clint, thank you so much for joining us here on the show. Again, I'd like to remind people to head over to orgmusic.com. There you'll be able to get all of the Dot Hacker catalog. Inhibition has a very limited splatter vinyl run. I think it's like 350 pieces or something like that. So get into that quick. Again, Inhibition is a great place to start on your Dot Hacker journey. They've also got the How's Your Process albums, as well as number 3, but also make sure you pick up one of the 7-inch Divination green vinyl pressings. I believe there's, again, probably 400 or 500 of those available. Then it's gone. And it has not only the fully produced song on one side, but also the demo song on the other. Very limited, very special, and very cool artwork as well. All of that and more is at orgmusic.com. Follow .hackerband on Twitter. And Clint, we look forward to continuing to hear about the rest of your adventures.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, there we go. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Clint Walsh of .hacker. Thanks, Clint, for coming on the show. Need to remind people that orgmusic.com has the entire .hacker catalog, including that brand new limited edition tri-color splatter of Inhibition, as well as the 7-inch single of Divination. Go up there now, orgmusic.com. Grab those before they're gone. Also, if you want to hear more of this interview and even see the video, head up to patreon.com/Vinyl Guide, join our community, and get the rest of the show. And that's it for this episode of the Vinyl Guide. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please share these episodes on your social media. I beg of you. Send them out on Twitter, share them on Instagram or Facebook, wherever. Even leave us a positive review. Go up to iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Sign in, give us 5 out of 5 or 10 out of 10, whatever the score is, and say something nice. Make us blush. That is always appreciated. And we'll be back shortly with a brand new episode. So until we talk next time, get out there and buy some records, people. Cheers.
That's it for this episode of The Vinyl Guide. Send your thoughts to Nate at thevinylguide.com or follow or tag us on Instagram at Vinyl Guide. Until next time, keep spinning.